Yeah, I think you're right. It's okay to get started.
Yeah, okay. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to probably for this group our first Zoom meeting, kind of educational meeting via Zoom. This topic of human trafficking came up particularly during one of our meetings and discussions with a concern regarding the refugee community and the possibility that there is human trafficking taking place and we're not aware of it. So we thought that it would be great to have a this topic and to learn basically, you know, what human trafficking is it taking place here in Milwaukee? What does it look like? What does it look like whether, you know, you have been here for many years or whether maybe you're a new immigrant or a refugee? And so we have two wonderful speakers we have with us today. But I thought, you know, we don't have a lot of people right now, that maybe what we'll do is just very, very quickly not have each person introduce themselves, but for the groups, one representative of each group can kind of introduce their organization, so we can allow the speakers to see what organizations are represented. So why don't we start, Al, why don't we start with you?
Okay, Al Dirtka with the International Institute of Wisconsin. And we're in our boardroom, and we've mustered together the majority of our staff. There's probably about 12 individuals that have joined us today. Everyone from online staff who deal every day with refugees to others who do not directly deal with refugees. Plus our interns also have joined us in this informational setting.
Wonderful,
thank you.
Amelia, why don't you introduce yourself as the kind of facilitator of this group too?
Sure. So I work with the state of Wisconsin, the Department of Children and Families Refugee Programs section, and I'm a refugee programs coordinator. And we originally started these meetings, but over time, the different subject matter experts in our group have kind of taken over. And I'm joined actually today with our state refugee coordinator, if she maybe wants to go next.
Good morning, everyone. This is Boyana Zoric Martinez. I am the state refugee coordinator for Department of Children and Families, working very closely with Amelia. And I know that quite a few of you were on some of those first calls, first meetings, first in-person meetings and dialogues and conversations that we have surrounding these very important topics. So I'm so happy to see all of you. I have a sick kid at home who didn't let me sleep last night, so I'm having a really bad face day, hair day, all of that. I'm not letting you see me today, but you can look at Amelia as the representative. She's more beautiful anyways, from our team. Anyhow, I really am honored to be here today. Really wanted to set aside some time to learn from all of you and listen to what you have to say, and really listen into the presenters that are going to be telling us more. So here at your disposal, if you have any questions, any thoughts, any ideas, anything that we can do to help better support you, we're more than happy to. Again, Amelia's been amazing in representing our office and connecting the dots and providing resources. So we're very lucky to have her lead the efforts, and I know she'll answer your questions, but I am here as well, and so is the rest of our team. So thank you, and I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. Cynthia, you're muted.
Good morning. My name is Cynthia Zarazoua. I work at Neighborhood House of Milwaukee's International Learning Program here at 25th in Wisconsin. We serve adult refugees, citizenship, English. We also have a small daycare for our students while they are in class. I and my colleague T. Paul are here today. Our teachers are on break. And I did have another colleague who planned to join, but with the ruling coming down on 10/2 that fee waivers will no longer be accepted for citizenship applications, we are very busy trying to process as many citizenship applications we can between now and then. So my colleagues have are meeting with students outside this morning to go over their paperwork. The representative of NHILP, and I look forward to this discussion today.
Kai, you're on mute.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Kai Gardner, and I am here from the Aurora Walkers Point Community Health Center. I am the refugee program health coordinator and social services coordinator for the Walker Point Clinic. And with me today are several members of our behavioral health and refugee team. We basically provide health and social services to refugees, undocumented, asylum seekers, and uninsured folks and other vulnerable populations. So thank you so much for hosting this.
Thank you. I have a number that comes up as 965-335. You want to unmute yourself and let us know who you are? Okay.
I'm sorry, that would be me.
Oh, okay.
Let me share my.
Hello.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Paul. I'm working with Kai, and I will be the current community healthcare worker. So yes, that's. I'm pretty new to the team. I just started working a couple days ago. So yeah.
Oh wow. Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, I have it says, okay, Leslie Davis.
Hi, hello. I am the staff psychologist at Walkers Point Community Clinic. I work with Kai. I do not tend to provide services for refugees. I am the person who sees the undocumented immigrant community, Spanish speaking. So this issue affects our community a lot. I've worked with Javier on some cases, but yes, so nice to be here. I may not be able to stay long, but glad you're doing this.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's see. I see someone from Hanan Refugee.
Hi, everyone. I think most people in here know me. This is Sheila Badwin. I'm with the lead for the Hanan Refugee Relief Group. I'm also on the board for the Our Peaceful Home project. I've been working closely with the Milwaukee Women's Coalition and Our Peaceful Home on our team has been working, and we've been working, and this is really an important topic of human trafficking. I'm glad you guys are having this conversation. Okay.
Thank you, Sheila. Let's see. I'd like Neela to introduce herself.
Hello, good morning. Thank you so much for having me today. I had the privilege of meeting Janan yesterday in person and then corresponding with Amelia this morning via email. So thank you so much. My name is Nella Kalpik. I work with Marcy's Law for Wisconsin, so crime victims' rights issue, but I also sit on Governor's Council on Domestic Abuse and Crime Victims' Rights Board. I'm also an immigrant and a survivor of domestic violence. So wearing many hats, but thank you so much. And Boyana, hi, I think you're from my part of the world. So it's nice to see you here. Thank you for having me.
Think so too. Zdravo.
Thank you. I have, and sorry if I'm, if I'm not pronouncing names. Your screen says Nang Thor.
Good morning, I'm Nang Thor from Maximus. We are the W-2 agency serving the West Central region and also the Northern region for refugee services.
Wonderful. Mary Flynn. You're muted.
Mary says, sorry, she just emailed me and says, yes, I'm on the phone now. So I wonder if you're able to, you can keep emailing me, or there's also a chat box option if you're unable to mute yourself.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure. Okay, we'll wait to hear from Mary. I'll introduce myself, Janine Najib, with the Milwaukee Muslim Women's Coalition, and I'm on this committee representing Our Peaceful Home, which is a culturally specific domestic abuse program, and I see some of the staff also on this call. Basma and Fatiha, and let's see who else. We got some others on there. So
Anissa is with me.
Huh?
Anissa is with me.
Oh yeah, I see Anissa there. Okay, wonderful.
Also, sorry to interrupt again, Dr. Sebastian just texted me. He is 2967, so there's a caller, I see it. There's a caller here.
Okay.
With the number 2967, and that is Dr. Sebastian. So thank you, Dr. Sebastian.
Wonderful, good. Did I miss any other organizations? Please unmute yourself and just jump in to introduce your organization. There are a number of people that are calling in, so you might be part of other organizations, but if you are an organization that we did not mention, please go ahead and unmute yourself. Okay, good. Wonderful. Thank you, everyone, it is a wonderful group that we have here together, and it's been a very wonderful group that meets to go over really issues that are of concern to the refugees that we serve. The way that we're going to run this today is we're going to have Dana speak first, and then we're going to have Javier speak next. I know that we had advertised Joshua. Joshua is no longer with the Latino Resource Center, so Javier is jumping in, and he has done this quite a bit as well. So I did not have enough time to get his bio, so he will introduce himself. But I'd like to go ahead and start by giving a very brief introduction of Dana World Patterson. I've known her for a number of years, and what's really interesting is that I found out, after meeting her by a few years, that I went to high school with her husband, and it's like, how funny is that? Anyhow, Dana has really spent many years in this field. She started 30 years ago, actually teaching etiquette and image and serving thousands of individuals. And then about 12 years ago, she decided to really take a deep dive into eradicating human trafficking. Her career, this area of her career started with just as a founding member of the County Human Trafficking Task Force, and then she transitioned as chairperson of the Human Trafficking Task Force of Greater Milwaukee, which is an affiliate of the City of Milwaukee Commission on Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault. It's really about bringing together like-minded individuals, organizations, agencies, for there to be a community response to eradicating human trafficking. At this time, Dana established the Foundations for Freedom. It's a 501c3 not-for-profit entity to strengthen women and girls, reduce their vulnerabilities, and eradicate human trafficking through education, awareness, advocacy, and prevention. And it is Dana's belief that one less victim in Milwaukee is one less victim in the world. And so this global perspective is strengthened by local efforts. She believes that the eradication of human trafficking is community-based and prevention is its core. So she has been involved in Project Pink, People Inspiring Needful Knowledge. And so this is the idea of a community engaged women and men committed to talking, teaching, training high school girls so that they don't get caught up in this. She is a humanitarian speaker, author, teacher, assistant pastor. She's been extremely busy. She has her undergraduate in speech pathology and her master's degree in educational leadership. And I have worked with her and sat on on a number of different groups and committees. So I'd like to at this time invite Dana to speak to all of you.
Thank you so much. It is a pleasure to be here. And we also serve on the City of Milwaukee Sexual Assault and Domestic Violence Commission. So we're commissioners in that way, Janann, constantly crossing paths. So thank you so much for having me. It is a pleasure to be here. And I always start by saying to share what I know so far. It was 12 years ago, as Janann stated, that I was introduced to the world of human trafficking. And Martha Love invited me to the conversation. I had never heard the term human trafficking. So she said, you need to come with me. And that's when we founded the County Human Trafficking Task Force. At that time, 12 years ago, so imagine 12 years ago to now, there were crickets. No one was talking about it. And the narrative was that this was an inner city Black girl, no father, poverty problem. So from entity to entity, system to system, we were hearing that narrative. And at the time, research said that this was a $32 billion industry worldwide. So we're thinking inner city Black girl, no father, poverty does not equal $32 billion worldwide. We began to beat the drum saying, not in our neighborhood, not in yours, not in our neighborhood, not in yours. And I'm giving you this history because Janann asked me to share the who, what, where, why. So going from 12 years ago to hearing crickets beating the drum, not in our neighborhood, not in yours, not in our neighborhood, not in yours. We were having lunch at UMOS, and at the time it was Attorney General J.B. Van Hollen, who said that human trafficking is occurring in all 72 counties in Wisconsin. And that was exactly what we needed to begin to crack the nut. Because at the time, people were saying, oh no, not in our neighborhood, can't be here, there's just no way. So we then added that in the narrative. And this is important as to how we have moved the task force and how we've really endeavored to grow awareness around human trafficking. When we come to facts, when we come to more knowledge, we call that an intersection. And I would always encourage those who are a part of the task force not to embellish it. It's salacious enough. There's no need to add your own spin on it, just tell the truth. So with him offering that this is happening all across our state, it was exactly what we needed at the right time to begin to push this conversation further beyond it being just this inner city Black girl problem. So now that people they were like, where's the quote? I can't find it, so on and so forth. Well, we heard it at UMOS. And I'm like, call him. So with that knowledge, those counties began to pay attention that human trafficking could indeed be happening in their back door. And if they just focus on the inner city Black girl, no father, poverty person, they're going to miss what's happening in their sphere. Now, of course, it is indeed the inner city Black girl, no father. What I call that is vulnerability. So we're talking about individuals who are vulnerable, which is the major intersection when we consider refugee resettlement and those who are in Milwaukee and within the county and those who have come into the United States. But before I move there, and then I'll tell you where my heart is as it pertains to this, because in the early days, I knew that there was a Somalian settlement near a police station. And as I was learning about vulnerability, I went to the lieutenant over there and I was like, are you aware that, there's a Somalian refugees, individuals have settled within your community? There could definitely be human trafficking interaction. And that it was so early on that the lieutenant did not have any awareness around human trafficking at all. So I went up the chain and I said, okay, well, speaking to the next person, are you aware that there could be human trafficking happening right in your back door because of the vulnerability? And again, crickets. So we've come a long way. I also asked Janan in those early days when one of my girlfriends who works with youth, one of the girls came to her and said, my father is wanting me to marry one of his friends. And so I asked Janan about that practice in America and if she's seeing it in Milwaukee. So we're definitely interfaced with these vulnerabilities, and it's imperative to know them. And you all, and I'm glad to be in your circle so that I can learn as much as I can as well, because this is also very important to me. So when you consider human trafficking, we all know that it's a crime. And it's what we call modern day slavery. The splitting of the hair is you must have force, fraud, and coercion. We're familiar with prostitution. We're familiar with what the streets would call pimping. And even, I don't want to be vulgar, but hoeing. They're not talking about human trafficking in the streets. They're talking about pimping. They're talking about hoeing. They're talking about those terms that are less endeared than human trafficking. So it's modern day slavery. It's a crime. You must have force, fraud, and coercion, which is the splitting of the hair of someone that would just, and I don't say that they want to, even though that is the argument, that they choose to sell their body for money, for sex. When you consider force, fraud, and coercion, now we're getting into the definition of human trafficking, where those three must be present for the exchange of commercial sex for money. If you're over 18, that must be proven. Under 18, you do not have to prove the force, fraud, and coercion. Why? Because children cannot consent to having sex. So we don't have to prove it in that way, but it's still human trafficking. So we're thankful for that. Now, who are the individuals that are connecting? Who are the victims? of human trafficking, we know that they can be any age. 13 is the average. Amelia, are you okay? Okay, great. 13 is the average age that girls are trafficked domestically. And that number is even lower when you consider the international trafficking that takes place. 13 being the lowest. I've met a woman who her father sold her when she was 4. So that's my youngest experience. But 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 is when many girls are introduced to it. And you can imagine why when you consider vulnerability. Wanting to be grown, other people are in their ear. So with that vulnerability coupled with whatever is happening, again, any traffickers do not care about the age. They don't care if you're male or female, transgender. The LGBTQ community is unfortunately affected by this. They don't care about your race. They don't care about your religion or your socioeconomic status. Having the pleasure, pardon me, of speaking to groups all around the state, you can just put the parallels of different communities on top of each other, where they all seem to be very, very similar within the realm of vulnerability. So keep in mind that we're talking about 27 million women and girls worldwide. And as I continued to study, I came across an article that said 60 million women and girls worldwide. 12 years ago, $32 billion worldwide. Now we're talking about $150 billion worldwide on the backs of women and girls. And so when you consider these statistics, if 80% are women, 50% are children experiencing vulnerability that have been trapped into this cycle of what we call human trafficking. It's horrific. So as we continue to move along, we know that there are tracks, what the streets will call them tracks. And that's where this movement from place to place occurs, where you'll find individuals typically working in those spheres. Now, some people are on the street working, and I was talking to other advocates yesterday, and there's quite an uptick in the number of individuals that they're seeing on the street. Also, you have to consider the hotel industry. And as we're talking about refugees, now I thought to myself, first you have guns, drugs, then the sale of humans as the third most profitable industry taking place. Guns, drugs, the selling of humans. So I'm thankful that you all are considering the individuals that you work with, because if there's a scarcity mindset, if there's the lack of being able to communicate verbally, if an individual, one federal officer called it pimp radar, where they're able to detect that something's missing. So as you're working with your population, it is important, and it goes back to etiquette and image. I tell the girls, look them in the eye. When you're interacting with people, pull your shoulders back, have an outward presence, even though you may be shaking in the inside, have an outward presence of confidence, because there is not a pimp on this earth that wants a confident individual. Someone that can speak up for themselves and fend for themselves, because they know they will simply have a lot of trouble on their hand. As I was thinking about who does this affect, I came across a wonderful article on statistics where it says that 68.5 million refugees are displaced worldwide. This was in 2017. And 25,000.4 million are registered refugees, 40,000 to be resettled in the US in 2019, approximately 300 resettled in Milwaukee in 2018, and you all know this, and that was lowered. And then, but what I really loved is that they said, pardon me, that 136 refugees resettled in 2017, and that about self-sufficiency. That's on the side of prevention. 1 in 6, so if we're operating with those who we want to be strong, they become ambassadors within the community so that they can share the signs and the symptoms of what's going on here in Milwaukee and throughout the county. They're usually recruited as a boyfriend, a parent, friends, family members, neighbors, and someone they trust. So rarely is it the boogeyman. Rarely is it the snatch and grab. It's usually coming from someone they know because they know that they're vulnerable. Unfortunately, once a person is trafficked, they're having to present themselves 10 to 15 times with a certain amount of money that must come in. Where are they contacted and or abducted? School, the internet, bus stations, malls, gas stations, strip clubs. Early days, we were able to hold back for 6 years the opportunity for strip clubs to continue to open, because what we knew was that individuals who, and even as young as 14, that were brought into the life were forced to work in strip clubs. So we were able to hold that back for 6 years. And during that time, we were raising awareness of what's going on in our community. That's just a simple overview. I know that we'll be able to get into it more as you ask questions and we're able to really dive in. But when you consider a person that has come from a place that is maybe war-torn or conflict, traveled a couple of continents to get to America, and then when they arrive in America, because of the vulnerabilities that they have, now they're faced with human trafficking. This becomes something that we must pay attention to, and advocates must have a good working knowledge of what this looks like so that we can stop it. And in addition to that, I would love to continue to drive down so that when they come here to resettle, that you all have the conversation of what to look for so that they can become one less person that is trafficked. Now, over time, if a person, you're working with a person and then they begin to get tattoos, that's a branding that says you belong to me. Modern day slavery. So branding. There's also, you're noticing now that maybe they're dressing a little different. Their conversation seems to be more savvy. They may have more money than you would think that they should have. It doesn't equate to where they're working. Maybe there are multiple cell phones, or where you once were able to reach them, now they're not picking up. Also, they may want to go to the doctor more. They're talking about an itch in their private area, you know, sexually transmitted diseases. Very important, just to listen for that. There may be someone that's always with them, and it could be a female. Indeed, it could be a female that is listening for that conversation to make sure that they do not, what they call, flip the pimp. Hence the trafficker. They're concerned about their safety. They're irritated. They're not sure. They're very insecure in the way they're moving now. And red flags. Maybe they've been arrested because it has taken a while to move from the low-hanging fruit of the survivors or the victims of human trafficking to moving to the perpetrators, getting them off the street, those who are driving the demand. And if it takes one contact to bring in, let's say, the female that is working, and again, please don't just think females. I want you to think about the men and the boys. And I also, if you're working within the LGBTQ community, I want you to be thinking about the transgendered individuals and those who may say that they're working to survive. They're having to sell their bodies to survive. So be mindful of that as well. Tattoos are huge. And then also if you're experiencing where they have bruises or their teeth are being knocked out, their burn marks, cuts, that's what's called a guerrilla pimp, someone who is very, very aggressive with the individuals in their quote unquote stables, which means the individuals that are in, that they are, I won't say caring for, that are part of their enterprise. So it starts off very romantic where they bring them in. It's very romantic. And then as one pimp said, if I can have sex with the head, then I'll have sex with the body. And that wasn't the word he used, but that's the mentality, to bring them in, to find out how vulnerable are you? And please be mindful that it is happening across the board. This is hidden in plain sight. But the more you know, the more you'll see it. The more you know, the more you'll see it. You'll be traveling, you'll be in the airport, the grocery store, picking up your children, whatever, you'll begin to see. Did you see that? And I want you to also pay attention to your gut. I'm thankful that you're wanting to have this conversation because you believe that it's happening in your community. Pay attention to why you believe that this is occurring. And then let's expand on it so that we can really drive down and bring those individuals hopefully to a place of safety and where they're dignified before being trafficked. So I know that I'll be able to answer a few more questions. I'm looking forward to Javier's presentation as well. And then we'll just keep it moving. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Dana. What we're going to do is have both speakers speak and then go ahead and open it up for Q&A so both of them can respond as well. So please do make sure to write down your questions so you don't forget about them. Our next speaker is Javier Asset. Okay, I'm gonna mess up your last name. You're going to introduce yourself, Javier. And like I said, I just found out this morning that he was going to be the replacement. But what I do know about you is, because I know that our Peaceful Home has worked with you in the past, and that you definitely are one of the individuals that are working in the trenches. And so we are very eager to hear from you, and please do introduce yourself. And I apologize again that I didn't have any information to be able to introduce you.
That is totally okay, Janan. So my name is Javier Acevedo. I am one of 3 advocates, victim advocates here at the UMOS Latina Resource Center. We're a program of UMOS. Most of you guys, I think we also have the UMOS refugee program online as well today. But as you guys know, UMOS is a statewide agency. We have satellite offices all around the state, primarily focused around working with migrant farm workers during the summer seasons. But we're not just in Wisconsin. We also have offices in Missouri, as well as Florida, Texas, and Minnesota as well. But our hub offices are located here in Wisconsin. I've been with the UMOS Latina Resource Center 10 years now, a little over 10 years. It's been a victim advocate who is also stationed out of Oshkosh, who also handles trafficking related issues related to survivors. So we do have an office in Oshkosh that works with survivors and tackles that northern, western part of the state as well. I work particularly with the Wisconsin Regional Anti-Human Trafficking Program, which is the name of our very specific anti-trafficking program here at the UMOS Latina Resource Center. It's a really long name. We call it UMOS RAT for short. So we're actually really happy to be here. I've actually done some work with some of the refugee resettlement agencies here in the state over the past few years. I'm eager to get back into doing that as well, because I know it's important that our refugees know the importance of looking out for these indicators, particularly labor trafficking indicators, which is a lot of what we've seen here in Milwaukee as it relates to refugees and foreign-born individuals. So we have a specialty in working with foreign-born survivors of both sex and labor trafficking. And I think that's what I'm here to talk to you guys about today. So I want to give you guys, show you guys just a few images here. So I'm gonna, if I can, Janan, can I share my screen really quick? If I can get this to work. Okay, so never mind, I can't get it to work. That's okay. So I wanted to show you a geographical map, and I can just I'll send this to Janan, and Janan can maybe disseminate it to all of you. But we are broken down into 2 regions. I am charged with the lower southwest region of Wisconsin, and then our coworker, my colleague Darwin, is charged with that upper northern western part. But we also have another amazing program called the Legal Assistance for Victims Program, which works specifically with survivors of sex trafficking and non-intimate partner sexual assault when it comes to legal services. So we have an advocate, her name is Melly de Jesus, and she works primarily with survivors of sex trafficking as it relates to non-intimate partner sexual violence. So we have that great initiative, and the attorneys that actually work in that project are the attorneys from Lotus Legal Clinic. I don't know if some of you guys might know Erica and Rachel, as well as Catherine Leonard. So those are the staff attorneys that are actually, UMO subcontracts Lotus Legal Clinic to provide the legal services for any survivors that are referred to that program. And services can range for legal immigration services to other minor civil things as well. So we have the RAP program, we have the LEV initiative, which is for non-intimate partner sexual violence, and then we also have 2 other funding sources, one under the Office of Victims of Crime, which is OVC, that allows us the opportunity to actually go out and actually serve victims directly. So through OVC, we actually have emergency monies and funding available for survivors of both sex and/or labor trafficking. The only issue with this program is that it excludes Milwaukee for the time being, but it includes the rest of the state of Wisconsin, which is great. We've been wanting to branch out for years to serve the rest of the state of Wisconsin. Prior to this RAP program, prior to 3 years ago, we were only charged with working in Kenosha, Racine, Milwaukee, Waukesha, and Ozaukee counties. But we found the need after receiving many referrals from counties around the state we found the need to expand our project statewide. So we made that pitch to the federal government and they approved it. And now we're a statewide initiative as of 3 years ago. So we're really happy with that growth. And we continue to grow as well. So the other funding source is, so OVC allows us to provide an array of different services aside from advocacy. We're able to relocate survivors if the survivor is exploited in Appleton and they're trafficked, or their exploiter lives in Appleton and they want to relocate to Waukesha, to Madison, to Milwaukee. We will help relocate them. We will fund and pay for emergency lodging. We have funds available for emergency housing, which could pay for rent, deposit, should that survivor be a survivor of labor or sex trafficking, among many other things. You know, we can pay for alcohol and drug treatment programs, so on and so forth, through OVC funding as well. But we also have TVAP, which is the Trafficking Victims Assistance Program. And TVAP is very specific and undocumented primarily. So TVAP gives us a much smaller pot of money to work with when it comes to working with foreign-born survivors of either sex or labor trafficking. So the allocated amount per survivor ranges anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000 up to $7,000 if it's a family unit. And then we have that pot of money to work with that survivor on determining whether or not they're a survivor, or you know, and seeing what those needs are for that individual. So our program is very robust in terms of funding, and it allows us the opportunity to work with survivors where they are and meet their needs. So I'm really happy to be here. I've actually, you know, over the past few years, you know, I've learned a lot from Dana. Dana has been doing this a lot longer than I have. You know, but I've really grown an extreme passion to working with survivors over the past 6-7 years now. I particularly have decided years ago to specialize in the area of labor trafficking, and many people know me throughout the state as the labor trafficking guy. And I gotta say, I'm very knowledgeable in the area, but I learn things every day. This is a learning game. I don't know everything. I'm constantly learning from our partners. I learn from Dana, I learn from our legal partners, I learn from partners all around the state, new things. So I appreciate the gesture and the comments of me being the expert, but it's a learning game, you know, but do feel free to reach out if you have any concerns related to labor. But we serve sex and or labor trafficking survivors. As Dana mentioned, labor trafficking is, you know, also requires the element of force, fraud, and coercion. And I want to focus a little bit more on labor trafficking because it's what we've seen a lot with our foreign-born individuals, not just refugees, but individuals from different parts of the world as well. So labor trafficking is a real issue, not just in Milwaukee, but around the entire state of Wisconsin, okay? And I wanna, and I'll talk about a few cases in just a little bit, but Dana brought up the arranged marriage sort of type exploitation. And the UMOS Latina Resource Center does have a history of working with those types of cases as it relates to trafficking. Back then, they would have probably been seen as domestic violence or sexual assault. Nowadays, we see a lot of these cases as a potential trafficking situation. So we have had refugees actually, not refugees, but individuals actually come into the US, come to Wisconsin on legitimate fiance visas to marry an arranged partner, you know, that mom or dad or a family member actually recommended or wants them to marry. And we've found that those individuals have found themselves in very tricky, sometimes very exploitive situations work-wise. I've had one case a few years ago where dad actually arranged for her to marry an older man. This individual was, I believe it was from Jordan. And if I'm not correct, it was from Jordan. And her father arranged for her to marry an older man who actually lived here in Wisconsin, a wealthy Indian man as well. And they arranged for her to come in on a fiance visa. And upon arriving here, she found herself in a situation where now she was forced to clean, cook. She wasn't allowed to have friends. She wasn't allowed to go worship. She wasn't allowed to do anything but to cater for this man who also had a wife here in Wisconsin. So we've seen those types of cases play out in numerous types of ways. We've also had men who have also come in on fiancé visas to marry American Wisconsin women, and found themselves also working to pay off extreme, and I like to call them imaginary debts, because survivors oftentimes don't know how much money they have to pay off, right? So my wife is saying that I have to pay her $8,000 for the money that she spent to get me here, right, on this visa, for her legal process, the flights, the travel, all this stuff. So now I found out when I arrived that I have to work to pay this off. You know, that it wasn't because she loved me, but I think she does love me, but she still wants me to pay back all of this money. So how am I going to pay it back? I'm going to have to promise to work to pay that back. So we've found survivors in all types of exploitation kind of scenarios, primarily agriculture throughout the state. Agriculture seems to be where we see a lot of cases coming out of. We've gotten reports over the past few years of refugees being recruited to work for staffing agencies and are dropped off of factory workers being picked up by the bus loads and not returning, you know, at 6 o'clock in the morning and not returning until like 10 o'clock midnight, you know, so those are 12 plus hours shifts that they're working, and sometimes they're not being paid at all, or they're being paid very minimal. So there's a lot that goes into educating. What I used to do with the refugee resettlement group here in Milwaukee is educating the refugees on workers' rights. I used to host sessions on letting them know what was customary, right, here in Milwaukee, in the state of Wisconsin, here in the U.S., what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. Some of the common dynamics that we see with foreign-born individuals is that a lot of times they'll experience much harsher conditions back in their home countries. So when they get here, what they experience here sometimes doesn't amount to what they've experienced back home. So I can settle for what's happening to me here, because if I go back home, it'll be 100 times worse, right? So we oftentimes see that as being a very common dynamic when working with foreign-born individuals, not just labor trafficking, but sex trafficking as well. And of course, another huge dynamic is that most of them will fear law enforcement, not just for immigration purposes, but they will fear law enforcement because of probably more than likely they experience, just like harsher work conditions, they experience really bad scenarios with law enforcement back in their home country. You know, so a lot of what we've seen with foreign-born individuals is that they will have an embedded fear or distrust of law enforcement in general when you meet them. So even talking about involving law enforcement and so on and so forth is a non-factor for them. So we try not to do that. A lot of times one of our big to-go process when we meet a survivor or a potential victim is that we make sure that we connect them to an immigration attorney or a victim rights attorney before we initiate an interview, before law enforcement becomes involved. We oftentimes try to make sure that they have that legal representation as well as that assurance, right? That I'm protected, that whatever I say is going on record, that someone is keeping track of what I'm saying, and that this individual or this group of people is assuring my safety, right? So aside from the embedded fear of law enforcement, immigration status is number one up there, right? I mean, most foreign individuals, regardless, I've had clients who have work permits that have their visas legitimate to be here and still fear law enforcement. I've had clients that say, hey, yeah, you know what, I'm legit. Here's my visa, here's my passport, here's my driver's license, here's my work permit. You guys can't mess with me. But still fear law enforcement and still fear immigration to a really big extent, right? So that embedded fear of immigration is something that a lot of foreign-born individuals experience despite their immigration status. A lot of the survivors that I've worked with over the years oftentimes also find themselves to blame for the situation that they find themselves in, right? I agreed to this, right? I had to agree to this. There was no other choice. Therefore, it's my fault. So, you know, I've had tons of survivors, and Dana can probably attest to that as well, that many survivors of even sex trafficking will oftentimes blame themselves as well for being in that situation. So there is a very normalized notion, right, of shame and embedded, blame that comes with working with survivors. Foreign-born individuals are oftentimes not aware of U.S. customs, U.S. laws, let alone state laws revolving around protections as well as workers' rights laws or worker rights, right, in general. They're not aware of the resources available to them. The interview process also completely changes, right? So when I'm working with a domestic survivor of trafficking, my interview is very different than when I'm working with an interview with someone who is from abroad, right? Someone from Mexico, someone from Jordan, someone from somewhere else, you know. The interviews tend to be somewhat very different because what we try to gauge a lot with our interview and our screening process when working with foreign-born individuals is their migration process, right? I'm not looking for transportation, you know, regardless, you know, transportation is oftentimes a key, you know, element that survivors will oftentimes experience throughout their trafficking situation, right? They'll be transported from, you know, Ozaukee County to Green Bay. From Green Bay, they'll come down to, you know, to Green Lake, Madison, so on and so forth. But transportation is, we will oftentimes see it in their exploited interview process, that they were transported across state lines, that they were transported throughout counties. But we want to know their migration process, right? How did you find out about the job? How did you find out about this smuggler? How did you find out about this coyote who's offering you, right, to cross you across the border? And what was promised to you, right? What was promised to you? Because like Dana said, force, fraud, coercion, right? There's an action that traffickers take, right? That action oftentimes involves recruitment, right? It oftentimes involves harboring, transportation. It oftentimes involves a couple other elements, right? But and by what means? Force, fraud, coercion, and for what purpose? Was it for sex? Was it for labor services? One of the two, right? So throughout that force, fraud, and coercion, that interview process is extremely critical because we're looking for threats of deportation, right? What is force? You know, I know that, you know, force can sometimes, for a lot of people, we get stuck on the physical violence, right? We think force, we think restraint, we think someone holding you down, but we don't think about other elements that could be, you know, intimidation, physical or sexual assault. There could be constant monitoring or isolation, right? There could be some harboring going on. There could be extreme food or sleep deprivation, right? Those are signs of force as well. So it's not just the physical stuff. And like Dana said earlier, if we focus on some of these, you know, this it only happens to Black girls in low impoverished communities, right? If we stick to that focus, that mindset, we lose out on so many other potential victims, right? And we're underserving those survivors that aren't necessarily Black. They aren't necessarily, you know, engaged in street-based prostitution. They're not necessarily being hit, right? One thing I do like about the federal law, the Federal Trafficking Victims Protection Act that was passed in October of 2000, guys, is that it allows for protection for foreign nationals, one, and it also permits prosecution where nonviolent elements of coercion were used to compel that individual to work or to be submissive in that situation, right? To sell sex or to work. All right, I always say that selling sex is a work issue. It is a labor issue, right? The product that they're selling is a labor issue, right? Because they're selling sex, right? But the Trafficking Victims Protection Act also encompasses and allows for individuals who weren't necessarily physically hit or sexually assaulted, but were threatened with deportation, right? But were threatened with harming their family back home, right? So those non-violent elements of coercion also make way for us being able to identify these individuals as trafficking victims too, right? So when we focus on some of the physically violent, heinous elements, we lose out on some of these cases that might be, that could indeed be trafficking as well, right? So I really like the federal TVPA because of that very specific element in it, right? But it also, and I also talked about protections. Most of you guys work with refugee resettlement agencies. A foreign-born individual who receives a letter from the Health and Human Services, Department of Health and Human Services, stating that they are a trafficking victim, or that survivor receives a letter from Homeland Security saying that they received continued presence. Continued presence is an immigration relief that is available to survivors, foreign-born undocumented survivors who are participating in an investigation. One of the first things I often ask law enforcement whenever my clients are being interviewed or participating in an investigation, when I'm working with foreign-born individuals, oftentimes it's not local law enforcement. Oftentimes it's either the State Department of Criminal Investigation or it's Homeland Security. We've had to work with FBI in the past, or it's the Department of Labor, the Office of Inspector General. So those are some of the main federal law enforcement agencies that we tend to work with when working with foreign-born individuals, and it's brought us a lot of really amazing results. I have clients now that have work permits and are probably making 2 times more money than I am right now. You know, so that's a really great thing. But when I have a client that is participating in an investigation, the first thing that I ask that law enforcement agent is, right? Because that continued presence is much visa than a T visa or other immigration remedies. You know, these individuals can receive a work permit up to 3 months after they initiate that investigation, right? So 3 months into their interview process, they're getting a work permit. And with that certification, I can get them enrolled in refugee medical assistance. I can get them enrolled in refugee cash assistance. I can get them enrolled in a bunch of other programs. Food share as well becomes available. You know, these are benefits that typically aren't available for foreign-born individuals. But as a result of them being trafficking victims, with that certification, we can access those types of benefits for those individuals. That's why it's so important for those individuals to be connected to an advocacy agency that knows what they're doing, right? Because healthcare, as well as some of those emergency services like refugee cash, as well as food share, can be so beneficial to a survivor and their long-term stability. You know, aside from that, Wisconsin receives thousands of guest workers every year, not just to work in agriculture, but guest workers from the Ukraine, guest workers from Mexico, Guadalajara, Venezuela, and they all come here on legitimate visas to work. And these individuals are extremely susceptible to being exploited because oftentimes they're connected to 2 or 3rd-party contractors that oftentimes develop their own fees, their own recruitment fees, their own housing fees, their own ways to benefit off of the labor of these workers, right? Under these federal guest worker programs, there are very strict requirements that these contractors need to follow. Do they follow them? No. So when it comes to those sorts of things, we work really closely with the Department of Workforce Development here in the state, and we go out, we visit workers as an outreach specialist as well. Aside from doing the advocacy, I do a lot of outreach throughout the state. My summer months are pretty busy working out in the fields, visiting our farm workers, as well as the Delta area. I mean, think about it. Wisconsin is home to the largest musical festival grounds in the world, right? We're also home to the largest water park grounds in the world as well. You know, so we receive tons of tourists. So Dana, you've always said this, wherever there's a demand, you know, best believe we'll always see some trafficking going on, right? So wherever there's tourists, there's always a demand for sex, right? And wherever there's a demand for sex, there's always a demand for victims, right? For individuals to be brought there to cater for those individuals looking for that sex. But there's also a demand for labor. These areas with these high profile rates of work, right? Water parks. Have you ever talked to your water park attendant at Wisconsin Dells, Noah's Ark, or Mount Olympus, or heard that they have an accent? 98% of those workers are coming from Ukraine. You know, 98% of those workers also have to abide by their contracting company's own requirements, right? So, you know, these individuals are very susceptible to being trafficked. But our agriculture industry is one industry that in last year alone provided over $104.8 billion to the state. And on an annual basis, there are over 67,000 jobs become available in farming, in agriculture alone on a yearly basis. And who fills those jobs? Undocumented immigrants or individuals coming on legitimate visas to work in that very specific industry. You know, so we're seeing survivors from all over the world. We've seen survivors from Dominican Republic. We've seen survivors from Puerto Rico. We've seen survivors from Mexico, Veracruz, you name it. We've seen survivors from all sorts of different places. And each one of them has experienced trafficking to their very uniquely. You know, we've also had the experience of working large scale cases. We've had a few years ago, I don't know if you guys have seen this on the news, last year, it was released that the U.S. Attorney's Office was pressing charges against this contracting company, Garcia and Sons. We were instrumental in recovering 22 victims from that case. And that happened almost 5 years ago. And they're just now pressing charges they're just now releasing charges against this contractor. So the time, the length of time that also goes on between, you know, before victims oftentimes even see any level of restitution or because survivors want to see justice for labor trafficking. Sometimes it's a if, right? If the state decides to pick up the charges, if the U.S. Attorney's Office decides to pick up the charges. So, it's really different when working with foreign-born individuals. You know, one of the most common dynamics that we see in foreign-born individuals is that deportation element, that most deportation, if they don't submit, if they don't continue working, if they don't stop, you know, complaining about their work conditions, that threat of deportation has been alive and real in their exploitation process. You know, and those high debts as well. You know, I can talk about this for days, Janan, you know, and so can Dana. You know, I guess I'd like to throw out there too that, you know, we do offer very specialized training that would be catered to, that is catered to very specific disciplines. We've done a lot of amazing work with law enforcement in rural Wisconsin. We've done a lot of amazing work with healthcare as well around the state. We have done some hotel work around the Wisconsin Dells area, which has been absolutely amazing to experience and to learn from. And I got to say that, and I'll leave this right here, you know, freedom of movement is my biggest pet peeve when it comes to working with law enforcement. You know, I've had cases where individuals were asked by law enforcement during an interview, you have your passport? Yes. Do you know how to get back home? No, but I can use Google Maps. So then you're not being trafficked, right? And I always say this, I've always said this, and that was as of 3 years ago when I had this one detective do that to me. I said, you know what, just because this individual has an open door does not mean that they were freely able to leave. The fact that I had to go hide behind his motel at 2 o'clock in the morning and wait for him to sneak out of the window with his bags and the little bit that he could carry did not make him freely able to go. He feared leaving, right? So just because an individual has their identity documents on them, just because an individual was never locked in a room or locked or handcuffed to a chair, does not mean that they were freely able to go, right? So what we have to look for is what kept them there. And that's what I often ask my clients is, what kept you in that situation? How'd you get there? And what kept you there, right? Oh, he threatened to call law enforcement. Oh, he threatened to hurt my children back home. Oh, he showed me a picture of my mom's house back in my home country, right? So, you know, what is keeping that individual in that situation? Okay, so freedom of movement has always been a huge piece of what I like to talk about when it comes to training and sessions like these, because it oftentimes, and I like to say that if we focus on the harsh treatments, we focus on some of that violent, excruciating stuff, we're going to miss out on some of these more subtle elements of nonviolence.
May I just dovetail right there? Because based on what you just said, and I wrote it down, victims of human trafficking do not always self-identify. So it's not going to always be in your face, this is exactly what it looks like. Sometimes they're there under the auspices of love. that something has been missing. And then that's just one way to lure them in. And then doing the small things for the family. When you speak about leaving of their own volition, it's like, well, why won't they just leave? Well, it's like, I liken it to the that electronic dog fence where you don't actually see the fence, but that dog knows that if it gets close to that fence, there's going to be a consequence. So you cannot, there's just no way. That coercion, they get in their mindset about, no, it's us against the world. Even if the victim is feeling renegade, like, I don't believe this, I'm not a hoe, I don't, pardon my French, but that's the language that I get from them, that this isn't me, I don't want to live like this, but they cannot cross that fence. So they're doing it for their future, they're doing it for their family. They will not self-identify. Human trafficking, they're like, what are you talking about? I'm not human trafficked. Being mindful of the inter-office terms that we use, we really have to infiltrate our own thinking the way they think, so that when they use different terms, it will connect us to what we know about human trafficking. And that's why when I say it's salacious, it's ugly. It's not pretty at all. And so the way they show up, you're watching for those signs so that you know, okay, something else is going on. Even if they don't identify that it is, something else is going on. And then you just continue to peel back the onion. One of the, what was very important in the beginning, and even now, even the way we've moved along, is that victims of human trafficking were willing to share their stories. So we were able to learn from the experience. Now there are a lot of people that have their hands in the pot, many people that are doing great work, but the best experiences we have received was when we could sit down with the anecdotal information that we have and learn from someone that has experienced it. Yeah. That has given us intel. So I don't want you to throw away the baby with the bathwater. The anecdotal experience is perfect, but you're going to take that information coupled with what a survivor will share with you and just continue to allow this to grow within you. And we certainly do not put a mic in front of someone's face and say, now tell me what happened. How many times have you had sex? Who was it with? Where were you hiding out? No. The way we work it in Foundations for Freedom, we just allow those stories to unfold. Once we know that they're safe, now it's our endeavor to bring dignity back to them. And so because of trauma, because of the things that they have hidden and the way they have numbed themselves. Some traffickers, drugs help them to continue to get up every day and to continue to move. There are other traffickers that do not allow drugs because it's like, okay, you're going to get sloppy, and you will not be able to function at your highest level. So you have different forms where trauma will either slow them down or it just keeps them in this agile place where they're constantly thinking about survival. So you just really have to get to know the individual, and every person is different. Yeah. And you may be in the midst of some traffickers as well within your communities. So I want you to be mindful that they do not look obvious. You know, where's the diamond in the back, sunroof top, digging the scene with the gangster lean? Absolutely not. They're showing up like boyfriends. They're showing up as family members. They're showing up as someone who cares so that they can infiltrate. And that is very, very important. So be mindful of who you're sharing with. And when you're talking about these things, who's listening, who's an earshot away, They're not dressing obvious. They're not speaking as if they're uneducated. They're blending in, they're assimilating. And one of the main tricks nowadays is that they're showing up as boyfriends, particularly on the sex trafficking side. They're showing up as boyfriends. Now they know where mom lives. They know where auntie lives, grandma, is dad in the home. They have all this information that they will then use against the victim. So be mindful of that. If they're calling someone daddy, it's like, he's not your daddy, but that's, again, an endearment term in the life. And be mindful that a female, they're also the groomers. They're traffickers, but they're also groomers. So they may show up as an auntie, a good friend, something like that. But in actuality, they're teaching them the ropes and making sure that the enterprise is protected. And it comes from the family. So you're talking to auntie like, well, have you noticed that it's acting a little different? Well, that person could be the groomer who you're sharing with.
You said something.
We have to. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. You said something that made me think of one of the cases that I got recently. Well, not recently, a couple years ago, and a case that we still work with that the state of Wisconsin actually picked up charges against this trafficker, and right now he faces up to 90 years in prison, up to $300,000 in fines. But he hasn't been charged yet, so we'll applaud when we get there, Dana. But we're hopeful that this, individual will be charged. But this particular case came in as a sexual assault, dropped off at a shelter as a sexual assault survivor. And the shelter referred the case to the Latina Resource Center, and we initially began to see it as a sexual assault. But if it wasn't for the advocate who was already crash-trained in trafficking by us, of course, she would have never picked up on these elements if she wasn't trained, So she immediately brought the case after the client left, of course, brought the case to me, and we sat down, me and my supervisor, Mariana, we sat down, we talked about it, and it was a clear-cut domestic servitude case. So what happened was this American man, this was actually the Hamilton High School teacher that was just charged, so he was a Hamilton High School teacher. He actually taught, I believe it was Chinese, or some foreign language and so he actually petitioned for a K-1 visa for this woman in the Philippines. So a K-1 visa is a fiance visa, and the terms for applying for that visa is that you have 90 days to marry. Some of you guys might be familiar with 90 Day Fiance, that show that's happening. But so he proposed that he was going to marry her, right? He wanted to meet her. So he flew out to the Philippines, met her children. He stayed out there for a few weeks when he proposed, right? So she was a little doubtful, but she really liked him. She wanted the opportunity to come to the US. She wanted to make this work. So she agreed that she would marry him. So the promise was that he would bring first her and her youngest child, and she had 2 other children that stayed with her relatives back in the Philippines, but that he promised that he was going to care for those children back home. And that was, when we talk about freedom of movement, and I asked my client, what kept you there? She would oftentimes refer back and say, well, he kept threatening to stop sending money back to my family back in the Philippines. He would constantly threaten to call the police on me and have me arrested and tell them that I was selling drugs. She had this constant fear that he was going to put something in her suitcases that was going to make the police believe that she was a criminal. So initially, she got here to the US, and one of the first things that she told me, she says, Javier, I thought he promised me that he was going to buy me flowers and pick me up at the airport. Instead, I spent 3 hours looking for him at the airport. He almost never showed. I found him outside waiting in his car. And when I got in his car, the first thing he gave me was a box of latex gloves and a face mask so that I can start cleaning as soon as I got home. So that upon arriving at the airport is when she really saw things taking a turn for the worse. And these cases can oftentimes present themselves as domestic violence, as sexual violence, but they can dig a little deeper, than just that. So we were able to classify this as a forced labor, domestic servitude situation. And right now, DCI is the one leading this investigation and picking up the charges against this individual. So that, really brought, something you said really triggered me to think about that case, Dana. And, it's, the reality is that, we are seeing cases play out, and you said it, and, having the experience of working with more than one victim in one case, over 100 potential victims in one time, you find yourself sometimes seeing, 30, 40, 50 people, all of them potential victims, but all of them presented different unique elements of trafficking. Not one was exactly the same. And when we say, each case is unique because not every case is going to present itself, in the same exact way. Even if it comes people, you oftentimes see very different elements play out in each different interview.
Thank you, Javier. Thank you, Dana. This has been very interesting. What I'd like to do now is open up for Q&A. So if anyone has questions, if you want to direct it to one or the other or both, just unmute yourself and go ahead and ask questions. And we just want to be conscious of time. So we'll try to move quickly and try to get as many questions as possible.
Hi, this is Boyana. Can I go, Janan?
Sure.
Okay, so thank you. Dana, it was such a pleasure listening to you, and Javier, as always, I've listened to you before, and it is always a pleasure. So thank you. This information is very helpful. I ditto everything you've said or echo, I should say, on everything you said about the signs and things that we often overlook and don't think about and all of that. But sometimes, especially in this group, and this particular group of individuals that I see on the screen, we have people that are very, very intentional about looking for those things. My question is really because we have such a sensitive group of people that is sensitive to the needs of those we serve, we often identify those things and then don't really know what to do about it. We want to help. We want to throw ourselves into those situations and rescue and save and do whatever it is that we can to get them out of that situation. But sometimes what we do might create more trouble. And I really would like for us to, sometimes again, we have a tendency to interpret everything as, human trafficking, or everything is domestic violence, because those are some of the things we're talking about. So then when we look for what's happening around us, we recognize these little signs. And I'm not talking about, slapping a hand of a child that's approaching, a stove full of active burners. I'm talking about, more serious things. So we want to know, and I want to know in particular, because I have been faced with some of our case providers coming to my office, and me in particular, to say, I recognize this is what's happening. Or sometimes people will say, we're hearing more and more. Or sometimes people will say, well, there are 3 or 4 families, or there's 5 families, or this. I really want to make sure that we take a step back and react with the most compassion. However, that we're not jumping the gun. We're not doing things that will hurt the individuals that are in question. And we're not going over there and trying to rescue. So what are some of the things and some of rules of thumb that you would point us to and give us to think about so that we are not causing more issues, but are working collectively and collaboratively to help without creating panic. Because that's one of the things that we tend to do. We create panic even within our own little consortium is, oh my God, this is what's happening. And how do we do with that? And no, I'm going to do this. No, you're going to do that. You make a call. I'm going to do, so those types of things that help us, give us some tools or some pointers to help best assist cases like that. Thank you.
Dana, me or you? I have some stuff to say. Yeah.
You want me to go?
I can go.
Okay, go for it. I'd like to speak to it as well.
Absolutely. So, here at the center, I've got to say that our leadership is pretty amazing when it comes to, the availability, that they have to hear us out when it comes to cases that might be extremely complex or we're not too sure of. So one thing that we do here a lot, and we do this with domestic violence, we do this with sexual assault, and we do this with trafficking, is that we'll sometimes staff cases. Not sometimes, we regularly staff cases with leadership to make sure that we are, we are on the same page, that we are seeing these kinds of things. Sometimes I might forget to ask or sort of, and really sort of pull out some very specific information. And, Mariana, my supervisor, is oftentimes like, did you about that? I'm like, oh, wow, let me go back and ask about this. So staffing cases has been a really great thing for us here as a team. We staff cases regularly within ourselves, the advocates, as well as our leadership, to make sure that one, our clients are being served, and they're being served in the best manner that they can be served, and two, that we make sure that these individuals are indeed trafficking survivors or et cetera, right? So that's one thing that we do on a regular basis. So second thing is, I sometimes, and I've been doing this for a little bit now, I sometimes find myself a little perplexed by certain cases. And sometimes I require a second opinion, right? And we work with trusted partners around the state that I trust with bringing some of this information to, of course, with the client's permission. And in most cases, I'm not even divulging names or any kind of specific information, just very general information, to make sure that if I do refer this person to this agency, they would be able to serve them, right? So we have a group of vetted partners throughout the state that we tend to work with on a regular basis. And by vetted, I mean, we know their services, we know how they work, we know that if we send a referral, they're going to act on it immediately. They're not just going to put it off to a side and forget about it. But we work with a group of partners that we tend to also rely on when it comes to confirmation of victim status, and sometimes we find ourselves, doing exactly just that, just staffing a case outside of UMOS, right? We have Lotus Legal Clinic. Sometimes I'll find myself saying, hey, you know what, if this person, I see them as a victim, but they might not qualify for any kind of immigration remedies. So, I like to always make sure that I have the information correct before, and we don't make promises to clients, but before we even pitch any possibilities, right? I like to say to those individuals, those survivors, I always like to make sure that I have my dots, and my, everything checked off. So staffing cases and working with a group of trusted partners who and can vouch for would be my recommendation.
Bojana, your point is very, very important. One, because being a vigilante can have tremendous consequences. Jumping out there if you don't have the facts. We move by the mantra that a client or the individuals that we're serving, they don't care how much we know, they want to know how much we care. And a person is not going to come out of the life, one, until they're ready. And the information that you have, and hopefully it won't be death, but the information that you have is building a story. So if you're more concerned about them versus the act of getting them out of the life, so to speak, you're going to go a little bit further. Unfortunately, it's said that that an individual who is sex trafficked is going to have 5 to 16 attempts. Coming back, I'm good. I don't want to go there. Going back. Coming out, going back. 5 to 16 times. So we cannot take it personal. But the reason you'll see that they will come back to you if you're non-judgmental. They're going to come back to you if you care about them. You'll be able just to pick up and keep going and add to the strength from the inside out. So for the advocates on the line, this is a journey. It's not a sprint. It cannot be a sprint, or else you're going to drive them further underground and they will not come to you. Why? Because they're already indoctrinated that they are to protect the perpetrator. They're to protect the trafficker. They're to protect their future. They're protecting, the family. So you're really an outsider. So if you move at a pace where they know that they can trust you, even though you know their business, but they can trust you because you're non-judgmental, you're going to be able to get in just a little bit more because oftentimes they've been taught not to trust. Trust no one but me, your dad. Trust your family only. And so now you're coming in, if you just want information, how much information can I get? This just seems like, oh no, slow it down. I love you, girl. How can I help you? I'm here for you.
So Dana, that's excellent. I really, really appreciate that. So just to give you an example, and I'm sorry guys, I'm going to shut up in a second, but just to give you an example, there could be a refugee family or an individual. Let's say and I think some of you know, there was in one instance, there was a minor who was here by themselves, and there was a suspicion that they were part of the human trafficking. Again, I think some of you know the case. This was happening the last couple of years. So, for example, with this individual, and I don't know if they did work with these individuals anyways, but I'm going to put it into a perspective for you. They come through a resettlement agency or helping with the resettlement agent, or resettlement agencies helping them. And I'm going to pick on LSS. I think Mary's somewhere here on the line. But they also work with Kai for their healthcare needs. But they also work with Cynthia for ESL. But they also work with, Janan for some other, there's a number of people that are on this call right now that could be involved in one case. And I think, again, it's important that we know that when those particular cases are identified, that pressure plays a key role. If everyone's trying to, if 4 or 5 individuals that are responsible for the care of this person are all trying to get information, are all trying to befriend, are all trying to, do their best to help salvage this situation, again, they might cause more harm. So I know that my colleagues on this call are very good about connecting with each other and sharing stories and trying to figure out information. But because their agencies have certain confidentiality and privacy agreements, they might not be able to share. So everyone might be able might be trying to get to the information from their own perspective. And that could create more pressure to the individual that's on the receiving end. So those are some of the real life things that we're dealing with that sometimes comes back to us as the state, quote unquote, the all receiver of all. And then we're trying to figure out where to go, what to do, how to get to this, how to, so those are some of the things that we're dealing with specifically the refugee populations here. And it's, really good to validate those feelings with you and hopefully get some further thoughts on how we handle, these types of things. So thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And can I just add to, I like what Dana said too, this is a journey. I oftentimes don't find myself conducting interviews during my first session. You know, sometimes it's my second or third session before I even start conducting an interview, depending on where that person's at, right? Some clients, as soon as they see me, you know, as soon as they walk into the door, they want to spill the beans. Some clients, you know, we have to work with a little bit before they gain that trust to want to talk about their experience. You know, some interviews have taken me 3, 4, 5, 6 times, you know, of going forward, going back, going forward. Okay, I see that this is something hard to talk about. We don't have to talk about this right now. Let's talk about this another day. And, you know, this constant back and forth. So, you know, if you know, it's a journey, it's not a sprint. I really like that, because I've seen advocates around the state want to find out everything, you know, and sometimes have that client in a room for 4 hours interviewing, and that's not healthy. You know, it's not healthy for you as the advocate, and it's definitely not going to be healthy for that client sitting in a room for 4 hours. And be mindful that, you know, that if law enforcement does get involved, that they're going to have to recant their story to law enforcement. They're going to have to recant their story to the next person, the DA, you on, so on, so forth. So there's so many people and different groups that are involved from the legal standpoint, to which they're going to have to also tell their story. So if you can minimize the amount of experience that they interact with, right, in terms of how many times they have to recant their story, that would be ideal. You don't want to re-expose survivors to their own trauma over. You know, as an advocate, of course, my role is to make sure that they understand that what they went through is a crime, and there are, you know, that they have rights. But, you know, and helping them understand how what happened to them is a crime, right? And re-exposing them to their own experiences is not going to do them any harm. So I don't know if maybe all these groups can come together in a format like this, and you talk about that one case instead of, you know, having the client in front of you and re-interviewing them and asking this very sensitive information, because it can be very probing, it can be very invasive, it can be very personal information, especially when you're working with survivors of sex-based, you know, trafficking, right? I mean, who wants to talk about their sexually exploitive experiences over and over and over again?
So what would you, sorry to just jump in, but what would you recommend our partners who are on the call today, if they are to encounter, if they were to come across a client who could be dealing with some of these issues you've talked about? I think it's really important that you focused, both of you focused on the possibility of non-violent elements of coercion. It's not always, you know, the guerrilla pimp. It's sometimes, you know, these other areas of intimidation or coercion that you talked about. I think that's really valuable. So what would the referral pathway look like? So should they be contacting you, Javier, or you, Dana, or what does that coordination and collaboration look like so that people aren't doing more harm than good, and that the client is getting the help and support that they really need?
Well, resources are wonderful, and we have quite a few organizations that are doing very, very good work. You'll probably find, and then the client is going to tell you where they want to be as well. So, you know, every client is not going to jive with Foundations for Freedom, is not going to jive with UMOS. So instead of bouncing them around, I think that as an advocate, and because you know them, putting them in touch with someone that can connect with their humanity at that point. It's like, okay, what do you need? Have you been eating? You know, are you hungry? You're looking at their clothes. Girl, I can get you, you want some jeans? You know, just helping them with their humanity, because there are many organizations that are doing good work. So I appreciate that. We have come a long way. We know who's doing good work, but I think it's just going to be a matter of you knowing what the resources are and then connecting their personality with that organization.
Absolutely, and it doesn't, maybe it doesn't happen with a referral right away. Maybe, Amelia, you might just want to call me and say, hey, I have this case. This is what's going on, without divulging information, right? Anything personal. I'm not going to know who that person is, but this is what's going on. What do you think you know, we do provide technical assistance as well. So I would see that as a technical assistance, right? A case discussion, right? I have this case, this is what this family is going through. What do you think? Is it trafficking? Is it not? This is what I've gotten so far. Would this be an appropriate referral for the UMOS Latina Resource Center? And we can move from there. I have partners all around the state that do that on a regular basis, right? They don't necessarily want to just send a person right away if you can't serve them, right? That's why I don't believe in just giving a client a referral, right? I like what Dana said. Once again, Dana, I'm loving your wording today. And the client will decide where they want to be. This is UMOS. This is what they can offer. This is what they do. Is it something you would like, right? But you could always start off with a phone call. Call us here at the Latina Resource Center. Call the National Human Trafficking Hotline. They have us. They have UMOS down. They have Dana down. They have all sorts of organizations around the state listed as service providers. So, and they're really great.
What's that number?
That's 1-888. 373.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see. 1-888-373-7888.
1-888-373.
7888.
7888. Okay, I think that's excellent advice. It looks like Boyana also put it in the chat group for anybody who wants to have access to it.
I call that number on a regular basis. They've helped me. They've actually paid for us myself. They've actually paid for flights for me to go and pick up survivors in other states and bring them back to Wisconsin. They've helped arrange travel arrangements for me and that survivor, or another advocate and that survivor. I've helped take or accompany survivors from Milwaukee to other states where they reside or where they live or where they were supposed to be, right? Through the National Human Trafficking Hotline. They have tons of amazing corporate partnerships around the U.S.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that Dana has another appointment that she needs to hop onto, but if you can both just include your email addresses in the chat box, and we'll continue with Javier, but I just wanted to thank Dana. I don't know if you had any last thoughts, Dana, before you left.
Yes, allow me to type this in really quick.
Also, while you're typing, just
yes.
Thank you very much for your perspective. You had a very powerful set of information to share, and we're going to walk away today better informed and with some tools we didn't have before, so thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It is truly my pleasure, and this is wind beneath my wings. I love sharing what I know, because I know that this is what has moved the needle over the past 12 years, working with the facts, sticking with the facts, and then adding as we have more intersections. And I'm committed to learning more about the refugee settlements here in Milwaukee and Wisconsin, because it is a critical intersection of individuals that are vulnerable. And we know that predators dwell where vulnerability is known. Predators dwell where vulnerability is known. So we want to equip the individuals that are coming to our city and state so that they will be less likely to become victims of human trafficking. So I am happy to continue the conversation. I want to learn from you all, and just remember that while you're putting all your heart and soul into it, that this is a journey, and that we're dealing with PTSD, individuals that are raped on a consistent basis. They've experienced some very, very traumatic incidents that they may not be able to talk about right away. So just wrap your arms around them and love on them the way you would want someone to love on you or to love on your daughter or son if they were not in your care. And that's the best, those are the best outcomes. When people know that you care about them, they're going to be there, even if they go away. Don't take it personal. They'll come back because they know you care. So thank you so much. This has really, really, really been a treat. Any additional questions or comments, or if you're interested in how, if we can be of service to you, let me know. And then also, because I'm the chair of the Human Trafficking Task Force of Greater Milwaukee, I'm intersecting with different organizations all the time. And if Foundations for Freedom can assist, I'm sourcing out. I'm not trying to build a case. I'm not trying to build a mountain in my organization, and I know individuals cannot be served properly. So that is imperative to me, that the individuals that are doing good work, that we source them out so that the women and the girls can be served the best. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana.
Thank you.
Right. Thanks, Javier. See you soon.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
I'm going to add my cell number as well, and feel free to call, okay?
Dana, I just went ahead and included your email because you had messaged me privately. So contact@foundationsforfreedom.org is Dana's email. So yeah, share your phone number to everyone.
Thank you.
So any other questions? We're cognizant of your time.
Yeah, I just wanted to say something to both of the presenters, especially the issue regarding labor trafficking, which I think goes under the radar a lot. But I'd like us to spend more time on this, deconstructing some of these issues more. I think that we need to look at the lens that we're looking through things at times. I think that we need to make distinctions between, for example, arranged marriage versus forced marriage. Arranged marriage where there are dowry rights for the woman versus a forced marriage to pay off a debt. I think also that we need to have refugee communities as a part of this process so that we understand where they're coming from. I'm not trying to justify any kind of practice that's oppressive to women or to any vulnerable community, but I think sometimes we may lump things together under certain terms, like human trafficking, where there might be something else going on. And we definitely don't want to drive people underground so that people don't get the help that they need. So for example, even terms of endearment that are cultural terms, such as auntie, poppy, whatever, are not necessarily indicators of human trafficking. They could be used, but not all the time. So I just want to make sure we're not, like Boyana was saying, jumping the gun.
I agree.
Well, maybe we can arrange another.
Yes.
Oh, someone else go first.
Oh, anyway, thank you, Kai. I agree with you and Boyana. I like to mention a few things when interviewing or speaking with people. I used to be a capital defense investigator, and a couple of tenets: you don't ever go in directly. I'm here to investigate the murder of Donna X. You go in indirectly, and then you be quiet. I know that's hard for some of you to believe that I can be quiet, but you shut up. Those pregnant pauses are invaluable and lead to people speaking when they ordinarily might not if they were being, questioned because of it being uncomfortable with pregnant pauses. So I would highly recommend that. And then I want to mention something that a colleague of Kai taught me, and I'm sorry, I forgot her name, but the medical provider who assisted with Mr. Ibrahim, and I'm paraphrasing, one of the first things, if not the first thing out of her mouth to him was something like, what is the best thing that can come out of this meeting today? What is the best thing that can come out of this visit? And I think that is a question that, I try to use, and I think that can be very helpful in revealing and letting that person, take, I don't want to say power, but be in a position where they can do the asking, they can do the sharing, versus us trying to pull out all sorts of pieces of information with a litany of questions that we want to tick out and write a response to. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, Cynthia. I've had, and my method of interviewing is sort of similar, right? I sometimes, and depending on the client, I found myself sometimes just saying, hello, how's it going today? And pausing, and here goes an hour's worth of information. And all I did was sit here and just stay silent, right? And of course, validate what they're telling me, every now and then break my silence and either agree or paraphrase what they're saying really helps. But I agree, silence sometimes is a really great thing to practice when it comes to working with survivors, especially when they haven't had that opportunity to talk about their story. Some survivors will want to talk, some won't, but in my experience, most of them do want to talk. So, practicing that silence, could get you a long way. I agree.
Wanted to quickly check in with IIW and see if anybody in that room has any questions or thoughts. So I know we only have 2 minutes left.
And to Kai's comment, Kai, I would love to schedule something to talk a little bit more and decipher labor trafficking for what it is. So I don't know if Janan or if someone here would like to organize that. I could organize it. We can set up a go-to meeting. I'll set that up if you guys want. Shoot me some dates, and I'd be to definitely introduce you guys to a session, particularly on labor trafficking. Another issue that I've been I want to bring up to this group now that I have you guys here. I don't know if you guys have noticed refugee families peddling on the east side of Milwaukee or like Glendale area. Have you guys noticed? Are you guys, okay, I see some.
Can I comment? I'm going to respond really quick. So they're not refugee families to our knowledge. And
I know I spoke to one of them, and some of them, one family was Romanian.
Yeah.
So even though they are, right, so they might be Romanian, but that doesn't make them a refugee. So we probably, just given the time, it's 10:59, we should definitely arrange a call. And actually, Kai, I know, well, Kai and Janan, if you want to separately reach out to Javier, even right after this call, to bring him up to speed on everything, and then maybe, Javier, you have information that we don't. But we've been having conversations very regularly about the families. Support has been offered and rejected on various occasions. Anybody want to add anything to that before we leave?
I just want to say that, if you've been in certain parts of the world where this is almost a career, it looks like we've got, which is rare for Milwaukee. We've seen it in other parts of the country. I've seen it in California, etc. But yeah, it was our concern at first that it was a refugee family, but it looks like it's a family that has made a career out of.
I've seen posts of them in Heartland. I saw them in Waukesha. I saw them on Monday in Glendale, I think it was, off of 76. Before that, I've seen them up and down Capitol on the east side of Milwaukee. So, I mean, I've reached out only because this has turned into an email thread among email threads between other partners as well that do, anti-human trafficking work. And there was some worries that they might be forced into peddling, but it doesn't. And it's funny, Janan, that you say that, because we were just talking about this to Mariana this morning. And I looked at her and I said, I don't think they're being forced. I think they're legitimately making buka money off of what they're doing.
Yeah, a lot of people are organized. No, I was going to say this is very organized. And I'm not trying to say anything negative about Roma culture, but the families that I've seen here are from the Roma culture, and for generations globally. They're very organized about panhandling. I saw it in the 80s in Boston and in the 90s in Chicago doing the same thing. So not to say that there aren't people that are a part of that community that are participating in trafficking, but I think we just need to, realize that they're not refugees, and that this is not necessarily human trafficking, but a way of life.
Yep.
Any questions,
Just
Al?
really quick,
You want to be cognizant of your group that has been there?
yes, thank you.
I don't think there's anything at this point in time. I think, the only thing I want to point out is that, and I wanted to get my folder. We were one of the first agencies back in 2008 when we turned this over. It was Rescue and Restore. And so there was only 2 agencies in Milwaukee that were dealing with human trafficking at that time. But it had a very different kind of focus. And so just to let you know that we were involved in the very beginnings of this whole issue. And so this was very interesting to see how far it's gone.
Wonderful. Yeah, if you have anything that you'd like to share with the group, that would be great. You can send it via email as well. So I think, as they said, this is an ongoing educational opportunity for all of us. So anyone else on this call that has any questions before we wrap up? I know we're a little bit over 11 o'clock. It's been a lot of information, I know. But anybody else have anything?
Can I just please ask Kai and Javier to include ILP in their labor trafficking meetings?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
What if we coordinate, so it seems like there's in general a bit of interest from different agencies, so we could always, let's talk offline and see what we can arrange for the whole group.
Absolutely. Just if you guys want to email me some dates and times, we can make this 30 minutes. We can make it an hour, 2 hours, 4 hours, a whole day long if you guys want to. But, we do have the go-to meeting platform, which is what UMOS would prefer us to use. But, I'm willing to work with whatever we got.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Javier. This has been a great discussion, and I think it's been helpful and built on, what we all are doing. And I think we will continue to learn and to grow and to kind of share information among the different agencies and organizations that are represented. And thanks to everyone that brought in also their staff to participate as well. I think, again, this is part of, staff education. Amelia, did you have anything you wanted to end with maybe?
Just echoing the thanks, and we had you come and speak to our Refugee Advisory Committee. I think it was in April of 2019, and people walked away just with a whole new understanding of what human trafficking entails. It's not just sex trafficking, it's also labor trafficking, and I think that we're really grateful to have access to someone who is such a great resource and is willing to make themselves very accessible, so that even just running by scenarios of different situations to better understand when and how to provide referrals and whatnot, we're just very grateful. So thank you for coming to our group, this new group of people again, and we're looking forward to continued partnership.
Absolutely. Thank you all.
Thank you all. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.
And thank you, Janan, for organizing everything.
Yes,
Thank you.
Thank you, Janan.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.